So these guys, this chicken and rooster, these are actually drinking cups. And they are made like the turned ivory pyramid. They are made from materials found in nature. If you look at their bodies, right, the kind of circular part of their body is a nautilus shell. So the shell was taken out of the ground or out of the sea. I don't know where you find nautilus shells, I guess in the ocean. And it was fused with gold, silver gilt, sorry, with silver. Gilt means it's inlaid with gold, so it's some fusion, but crafted, shaped into the chicken and the chicken and the rooster, the hen and the rooster. So again, here what we see is that the elector was not only interested in the lark and the nightingale, he was also interested in these kind of weird barnyard animals, the more base, the more vulgar, the more common and crass perhaps. And this is also part of nature. So curiosities don't just mean the exotic and beautiful, they can also mean the everyday that is constructed out of the exotic material. Okay, can we go on? I don't remember what's next, actually. Oh yeah, so this is another good example. Saxony had a very long-standing, Saxony is very rich with minerals, with jewels and minerals, and there was a big mining industry in Saxony. So one of the things that was very common in the Kunstkammer, and again, all these pieces they were in the Kunstkammer in 1627 or earlier, and they're also, they're still there now. The collection was dispersed, but they're actually trying to reconstruct the whole thing. Some of it stayed in Dresden, and they're trying to reconstruct the whole collection now. So this is an emerald cluster that, gosh, doesn't that look like it was just taken out of the rock, out of a kind of cave wall and plunked down in the Elector's Kunstkammer? But actually, no. It is fabricated. Again, the emeralds are fused together with pitch. They're actually made into a cluster that looks like it should have been taken from nature. Okay, so one more. If we could do one more slide. Yes, great. So one of the documents that I found that attests to the cultures of collecting, right? What it meant to be a collector if you were a nobleman in Germany in the early 17th century, is this travel diary by somebody who lived nearby in Augsburg, this guy Philipp Heinhofer. So Heinhofer describes the Kunstkammer, and then in frustration, right, he visited the Kunstkammer, and in frustration he writes, there are in this Kunstkammer, on all the tables, in all the chests, and on all the walls, so many small and large, ugly and elegant, right, you see ugly, so it's an important thing, right? Ugly and elegant tools and items that one would need several days to see everything one wanted and needed to see, and to observe nature and art. So this, to me, rounded out the process of research for me, right? So the idea that the purpose of the Kunstkammer was to observe nature and art, to look at the nautilus shells, and also to look at how they're transformed by an artisan, by a craftsman. So here's Farina saying, I'm going to now listen to nature and art. He says, I'm going to animate the music of both nature, the dogs, the cats, and the chickens, and art, and all the musical instruments that we've talked that he imitates in here, that he represents in here, are representations of art. So that was the kind of whole process from beginning to end. I've gone on about this for longer than I wanted to. I do want to say a little bit about the process of writing, if that's okay with you, since I guess that's why I was asked to come here. So I have one more slide. This is the first time I've made a little. Wow, one of these pretty little tables in PowerPoint. I don't know, I'm making it up. There are those out there who would tell you that the process of teaching and the process of research are completely separate and different. So I've given you one example of how that's, in my mind, not true, right? Research, to me, research and teaching are intimately connected. The way that I think as a researcher informs how I teach. And what I talk about in my classrooms informs who I am as a scholar. And so I really view the classroom as both a way of training new thinkers and listeners and teachers, and also a way for me to share ideas and learn from my students, and that's really an important thing for me. So I guess the process, if I had to pick a starting point, it would be reading, right? And that's what I did first, that I got a question in a classroom and it made me say, I do not know the answer to this. Let me go find out what have other people written about this? What can I learn from where the conversation is in print, right? The written conversation is right now. Then I bring that material to my students. I try to teach them what I've learned from my reading, and I communicate information to them, and also presumably like something like the methodology, right? The way that those researchers that I've read have presented their ideas. Then I discuss all of that with my students, and that's really important in this whole process of advancing knowledge, right? Because I think that is actually what we're trying to do in high school, in college, in graduate school. What are we trying to do? We're trying to learn, and we're also just trying to understand things better as a community of thinkers. That, in turn, these two steps happen at the same time, but as we discuss things, my students also, I think, learn how to do research. They learn how to think about questions and how to find answers. Then I go back and research. I'm using that word research a lot. I try to find answers to the questions that have been raised in class. Then I bring my answers not just to my students, but also to my colleagues, to people who I work with, other scholars, and I do that in my own department, in my home institution, and I do that by going to conferences, and by emailing people, and by calling people, and asking for advice. And then I try to write up what I have been thinking about, and I will submit it to a journal. So I should pause over that word writing. To me, language is not just a way of communicating ideas, it's a way of refining and focusing ideas. And to me, language can be efficient, elegant, and it can be precise, and it can be informative at the same time as being poetic and beautiful. That's the kind of ideal of language of writing that I aspire to. I picked my graduate school based on the fact that the person I wanted to work with was one. I admired her book. I admired her book more than almost anything else I had read on the subjects I was interested in, and I wanted to go learn how to write from her. So what I do is I write up what I'm thinking about, and I will submit it to a journal. And those two words, peer review, what that means is that the journal says, okay, you want to publish with us? Well, we're not so sure. Let us send out your article for review. We're going to send it to experts in the field, other people who know something about the topic you're writing about, and we're going to see what they have to say. So it's not like anybody else has ever written an article on the Capriccio Stravagante, but the journal that I published with did send the piece out to somebody else, to a few other people who had written on music in early 17th century Dresden, or who had written on early Italian instrumental music. Right, so there are people whose work touches on my work, and they are considered experts, and the journal deferred to them in making a decision about whether to publish or not to publish my piece. And by the way, why is Wikipedia, right, all of your teachers, I assume, tell you Wikipedia is not a good source for scholarly study. Why is Wikipedia not a good source? Because it's not peer-reviewed. Or it's not peer-reviewed by any person who stands up and says, I am responsible for the content of this article, right? So I could assign all of you now to go home and find 3 mistakes in Wikipedia in articles on the subject of which you are an expert, and you would be able to find them in 20 minutes. It would be easy for you to find mistakes in Wikipedia. That is one of the assignments that I give to my students in my research methods class. When I'm teaching them how to do research, I send them home the first week and say, find X number of mistakes in Wikipedia, and they never have any trouble doing that. That's why Wikipedia is not reliable, because it is not peer-reviewed. Okay? Then we publish. Hopefully we get accepted and we publish, and then I'm not the only one out there publishing. There are hundreds, thousands of other scholars in music, and thousands, many thousands in the humanities in general, who are writing about art, who are writing about early science, who are writing about literature and drama and visual art, and dance. All of these work can inform what I am writing. So then we have that moment of publication, which feeds back into the moment of reading. And it's that junction between publication and reading, that's where we make advances in knowledge. That's where we learn more. So I've said that this is the cycle of teaching and research in the humanities. I don't know how it works in the sciences, but I think that it's probably something similar to this, right? You have to get peer reviewed, you have to have your research checked, you have to have the methods checked, you have to have research that is clear, writing that is clear and easy to follow and understand and replicate. And you have to situate what you're writing in this ongoing conversation. To me, writing and this whole process of teaching and writing and reading, it's very hopeful. I'm very optimistic about this process. And to me, what it shows is that as a community, people who write and read can together learn a lot of stuff. And that's something I really like. I promised myself I was going to say a couple more. Yes. But I've mentioned a couple of times, this is the last thing I'm going to say, I picked my graduate school based on what teacher I wanted to study with. My career was started by Don Irving, and I'm tremendously grateful to him for that. At each stage of my development and career, I have and continue to seek out mentors and teachers. So for the students in the room, I would just encourage you really to do that, not to be cynical about your teachers. I know some of them are dorky like me, but they also probably have a lot, I'm sure that they have a lot to offer in terms of guidance and inspiration. And that is really an important thing. So I'm happy to take questions if we have any, or call it a night. That's all.
You were going to explain why it took so long, that publishing process in particular?
Yeah, one of the reviewers backed out in the middle. She had a family emergency, so after sitting on the article for like because everybody's really busy, right? So after sitting on the article for like 5 months, and I don't know who it was, right? Because that part of it is blind to me. Like I'm not allowed to know who's saying good or bad things about me. But one of the readers had to back out. And in general, the journal that I submitted this to has a reputation, I found out later, of moving pretty slowly through things. But I've had journal articles that I've submitted. I submitted one last July, and it was published in February. So the whole process only took that many months, not too long. Yeah.
I have a question. Could you please give some of the advice about the bibliography when, for example, like you're doing a research work? So basically, I have a problem. I did a research a couple of years ago on the medieval history of particular regions of France, like the southern part. But I realized in the end that I didn't really make a bibliography, and I don't really remember which sources did I use, like some of the books, some of the historical.
Gosh. So you mean like to retrace what you did?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is a lesson. That's a tough lesson to learn, right?
It is.
What it means is, I mean, the only thing I can say is that you got to sit there with all the materials you took out of the library and all the articles that you photocopied or printed out and go through every single one of them. But this is a lesson for next time. Why are footnotes and bibliographies so important? So bibliographies are important because they can, in a published piece, they actually show your reader what shaped your thinking, like what part of this little conversation about history are you interested in. But footnotes are important because they allow your thought process to be repeated and replicated and tested. So that goes for you yourself also, right? You want to be able to go back to your own work and build on it. And if you don't have the footnotes or the bibliography in place, then you have to just reconstruct everything. It's devastating, I know. It's really hard.
Yeah, I tried to, but it's even harder than what the actual work was.
Yeah. I mean, I also said I was going to say something about online resources. Google Books is incredible. So for people who study early modern history, especially stuff starting from after the printing press was invented, we can download full-text PDFs of thousands of documents, and many of them are thousands of pages long. You could just download the entire thing as a PDF. Some of them are even searchable, right? Even in like the old weird German notation script, strange typefaces, they're actually searchable. Google has managed to teach its search engines how to read a lot of those fonts. But in terms of tracking down bibliography, if you have quotations, you can enter your quotation into Google Books and you will probably come up with the source it came from, if it came from a book. If it came from an article, like a journal article, do you know JSTOR? Do you use JSTOR at all here?
No, not really.
No? JSTOR is a database of scholarly journals, magazines. I'm sure Rooster Academy subscribes to that.
Yes.
Okay, good. So you can, if you ask a librarian for help going into JSTOR, again, you can put in quotation marks a passage that you've quoted from your article, and you should be able to come up. It should spit out the title of the article that you had it from. So if you have actual quotations from those sources, then you'll be able to track them down using some of these online resources. If you don't have quotations from them, then it's going to be a lot of work.
I have a question about the Elector of Saxony himself, actually.
Okay.
Just after listening to your work, and a couple of things. One is when I start seeing some of his collection and you're seeing nature and animals and art, you're thinking almost of the Bohemian movement, and I'm not sure, if there's any relationship between what he did and neighboring Czechoslovakia, for one, and then the second sort of part of that is, if that is kind of the case, where you have nature, this collection of animals in nature, almost seems like a menagerie of sorts, though at the level that someone of the status of, Augustus, the Elector of Saxony, could actually put together his own menagerie, his own created natural hybrid world.
So yes, in answer to the second thing, yes, that's exactly what he's doing. He's trying to recreate the world in a small form right in his palace and on his grounds. That's exactly what he's trying to do. If you think about do you guys know, anybody learned about the scientific revolution? Have you talked about that in your history classes? So the scientific revolution is generally thought to begin around 1650. This is right on the cusp of that, when a kind of serious, rigorous scientific method is being developed, that we do experiments and we can test the experiments, we can test our results, we can test the method and test the results, replicate the results. And this idea that actually we can look around the world, look around us and understand the world not in purely religious terms and not in purely kind of mystical or magical terms, superstitious terms, but that we can actually understand it in purely scientific terms. That's something that's happening right around now. So this idea of recreating the world actually has practical implications. We have portraits of not the Elector of Saxony himself that I know of, but other noblemen of this time period sitting with telescopes, sitting with protractors and compasses, maps of the world, and trying to kind of really understand from a scientific perspective how things work and the way things are put together. So that is a big part of what's going on here. And now I'm forgetting your first question, sorry.
Well, I was wondering about just the whole concept of Bohemianism.
Oh
that
yeah,
kind of
so
thing.
again, this phenomenon of collecting was something that was all over Europe. It was in France, it was in England, it was in Germany, it was in Poland. I don't know about Bohemia in particular, but I assume that it existed there too.
I have a question about the automaton. So basically, is it a unique one for that period of time and that culture, or is it a whole series of automatons created by a certain group or single scientist?
So automata were features of these collections all over Europe that you could have, right? You could have, Montaigne talks about automated fountains and stuff that are run by clockwork mechanisms, and that's in France that he's writing about. So yeah, this idea that you can create motion, you can animate something, you can animate even a little figurine of a person, which is, in a way, I think, using what was called the mechanistic philosophy of life. It's something that was close to creating life. It actually, if you could make something move, you could almost make believe that it was alive. So that was a new technology, and it was something that was really powerful. So yeah, clocks are becoming more. What is a clock? It's an automaton, right? It's a machine that runs by itself. Clocks are becoming more accurate during the early 17th century. Galileo himself is working on the isometry of the pendulum at this moment, right? The pendulum clock has implications for timekeeping and the accuracy of, even navigation of ships across the ocean. These automatic machines are really prominent features of collections and gardens and kind of displays of creativity all over Europe. Yeah.
Sorry, I have one more question.
Sure.
So basically, in that period of time, Europe was taking a lot of Greek history, like ancient Greeks.
Yes.
So are those automatons also based on the Greek automatons, or those are
Yes.
completely independent?
Yes. There's a treatise that was supposed that was in wide circulation on machinery, on mechanization. I need some time to think of the name, but there are books written about machinery and automatic motion and stuff that were supposedly they were thought at that point to have been written in ancient Greece, and then were translated into German and Italian and French. Some of them were actually fabrications, and some of them actually were holdovers from the ancient world. But yes, they really saw themselves in a way as replicating the genius of ancient Greece and Rome. Yeah.
Also, it might be interesting, but when I was a child, me and my friend, we found the Greek, not the original book, but the translation of the book, Greek book, and so we basically together built a horse, like automaton horse.
Okay.
So it's like, but the thing is, what is interesting is that the translation of this book came from, originally it was in Greek, then it came to the ancient German, not the ancient German, the medieval German, then it came to the modern German, then it came to Russian. So,
All right.
I mean, it's interesting how the knowledge from the 2,000 years ago comes to the modern period.
Right, all through the art of writing. Okay. Did you have a question? No? Okay, well, thank you again very much for having me.